Welcome to this journey into one of the most unsettling stories the graveyards of Glasgow have ever held in their cold, silent embrace. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from, because the places we're about to walk through hide more than shadows and stone. They hide secrets that were never meant to resurface. This story is a work of fiction created purely for entertainment. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Fiona MacDonald never truly liked living alone in her small flat in the Govanhill district of Glasgow. But independence was something she fought for her whole life, and she wasn't about to let discomfort take that away. The year was 1973, a time when the city carried a roughness that you could feel in the air, heavy, gritty, almost metallic. It was a place where stories traveled faster than buses and lingered longer than smoke from the factories. Fiona worked evenings at a textile mill, often returning home after midnight, walking through dimly lit streets where the glow of street lamps flickered like they were trying to stay alive. But Fiona was used to it. What she wasn't used to, however, was the sense that someone had begun paying attention to her. It started subtly that winter, with footsteps that seemed to echo hers on her walk home. She dismissed the idea at first, convincing herself it was the city's usual background noise. Trains rumbling, men stumbling out of pubs, stray dogs knocking over bins. Glasgow had its own kind of music, and Fiona assumed she was just becoming too aware of it. But the first real sign came one fog-soaked night in early December. She reached her flat, unlocked the door, and there it was, tucked under the corner of her welcome mat, a folded piece of paper, damp around the edges. She picked it up, thinking it might be a notice from the landlord or an advertisement someone slid under everyone's door. But the moment she unfolded it, her hands went cold. It said nothing more than her name, written once, carefully, deliberately. Fiona. No last name, no message, just her first name, as if whoever left it had whispered it onto the page. She frowned, tried to laugh it off, and placed the note on her kitchen counter. But as she washed her face in the bathroom mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching her from somewhere, someone amused by her confusion. The next night brought another note. This one wasn't tucked under the mat. It was placed neatly against her door frame, written in the same handwriting, the same slow, deliberate pen strokes. This time it read, "Beautiful hair." Fiona slammed her door shut and leaned her forehead against it, breathing in sharp, short bursts. Her hair was always tucked under a scarf on her walk home. How would anyone have seen it? She paced her kitchen, trying to calm her nerves, telling herself someone was playing a childish prank. But deep inside, she knew it wasn't a prank. The handwriting was too careful, the placement too precise, the tone too personal, and the silence around her was too heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. She couldn't sleep that night. Every sound, every shift of the pipes, every passing car, every murmur of wind felt like it had meaning. When morning finally came, she felt like her bones had aged 10 years. At the mill that day, she tried telling one of her co-workers, Mary, about the notes. Mary listened with round, sympathetic eyes, but then laughed it off. "It's Glasgow," she said. "Half the men here don't know how to talk to a woman properly. Probably some daft lad too scared to speak to you." But Fiona didn't believe that, and her silence afterward made it clear. This wasn't the behavior of a shy man. This was something else. Something colder. That night, she walked home faster than usual, clutching her scarf tightly, refusing to look behind her even when she felt the urge crawling up her spine. Her keys trembled in her hand as she unlocked the door. For a moment she hesitated, heart pounding, praying there would be no note waiting for her. There wasn't. Relief washed over her in a fragile wave. But before she could fully exhale, her eyes drifted toward the window at the far end of her hallway. That's when she saw the shape. A silhouette, standing perfectly still on the opposite side of the street. The street lamp behind the figure cast it in shadow, erasing the details of face or clothing, but she could tell it was a man. Tall, motionless, facing her building like he had been waiting, watching. Fiona froze. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, didn't tilt its head, just existed there like a dark stain in the fog. She stepped back instinctively, but something inside her refused to let her close the door. She watched him, and he watched her. Then, without warning, her hallway light flickered. When it returned, the silhouette was gone. That night, Fiona didn't sleep at all. She sat by her kitchen table with all the lights on, clutching a cup of tea that went cold hours before, jumping at every sound from the street below. She kept replaying the silhouette in her mind, the unmoving posture, the certainty that the figure wasn't just passing by. He was waiting for her. The next morning she found the third note, this time placed dead center on her doormat. No wind could have blown it there so perfectly. 3 words, handwritten with the same eerie precision. I saw you. Fiona dropped the note like it burned her skin. Her breaths grew shallow, her mind racing, her heart beating so hard she felt it in her fingertips. She knew then that whoever was doing this wasn't simply watching her. He was close. Very close. Too close. And he wanted her to know it. The city outside went on as usual, children running to school, buses rumbling past, neighbors arguing through thin walls, but Fiona felt as though she had fallen out of sync with the rest of the world. Something was following her. Something that had chosen her. Something that had now made itself known, and she sensed, with a dread sinking deeper every second, that this was only the beginning. The day after the third note, Fiona moved through her routine as if wrapped in fog. Nothing around her felt real. Not the chatter of the mill workers, not the whir of the machines, not the warmth of the teacup between her trembling fingers. She kept replaying the silhouette in her mind, the way it had stood there, waiting, its presence cutting through the night like a blade. She tried convincing herself to talk to someone, to the police, a neighbor, anyone. But every time she considered it, something inside her twisted into knots. A voice whispered that whoever was watching her would know. He would sense it, and he would escalate. She didn't know why she felt that so strongly. She just did. That evening, when her shift ended, she lingered in the locker room far longer than usual. She hoped leaving later would help her avoid the figure or whatever presence was stalking her. But the idea of walking home alone made her lungs feel tight. She considered asking one of the other women to walk with her, but she couldn't bring herself to explain why. What would she say? A shadow is following me? Someone is writing notes about my hair? It sounded childish when said out loud until she remembered the handwriting. Precise, controlled, patient. She took a deep breath, wrapped her scarf around her neck, and stepped outside. The cold air slapped her cheeks, sharper than usual. As if the night itself was warning her, she started down the familiar streets, but her steps were faster than normal, her shoulders tense, her heartbeat picking up with every corner she turned. Glasgow at night had never felt gentle, but now it felt hostile. Every alley seemed deeper, every shadow darker, every face unreadable. And then she heard it again. Footsteps, soft, steady, matching her rhythm. She didn't look back. She didn't want confirmation. She just walked faster. But the steps stayed behind her, still matching, still following, not closing in, not drifting away. Just there, watching her with sound. The moment she turned onto her street, the footsteps stopped. Not faded, not slowed. Stopped. Completely. Like the person had vanished into thin air. Fiona forced herself to keep walking, though she felt like every part of her body was screaming at her to run. She reached her door, fumbled with her keys, and slipped inside, locking it immediately. The air inside her flat felt stale, untouched, unnervingly still. She leaned against the door and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. She finally stood and walked into the kitchen, trying to regain some sense of life around her. But her eyes kept drifting toward the window that faced the street. She regretted looking. A figure stood under the street lamp again, not moving, not shifting. Just like before, Fiona's blood froze. She stepped backward slowly, careful not to let her silhouette be seen from outside. Her mind raced. How long had he been there? Had he followed her home again? Was he the one who stopped walking behind her, only to appear there moments later? She held her breath and waited again for the silhouette to disappear, but this time it didn't. It stayed, watching. Hours passed. The figure eventually stepped back into the darkness, dissolving into the blackness of the street. Fiona didn't sleep that night, or the night after. By the third day, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Her co-workers noticed her pale complexion and distant stare. Even Mary, who usually joked about everything, looked concerned. "Are you sure you're all right?" she asked quietly. Fiona nodded with a small, lying smile. That evening, before heading home, she considered taking a different route, but something inside her said it wouldn't matter. Whoever was watching her already knew her patterns. Changing them wouldn't make her invisible. She walked home quickly, her hands clenched tightly around her bag, her breath visible in the frigid air. She scanned the street as she approached. Heard building. No silhouette this time. No figure waiting under the lamp. For a moment she allowed herself to believe the nightmare was easing. Then she saw the envelope, not tucked under the mat, not leaning against the frame, but taped directly to her door. She approached slowly, her heartbeat ringing in her ears. The envelope was cream-colored, neatly sealed, with her name written across it in the same careful handwriting. Fiona, her fingers hesitated before peeling it open. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of her, walking home, taken from behind. But it wasn't the image itself that made her stomach twist. It was the timestamp written at the bottom in blue ink. Last night. She staggered backward, clutching the photo, bile rising in her throat. Someone had been close enough to capture the image. Someone had been following her in the dark, unseen, silent. She dropped the envelope and rushed inside her flat, locking the door, checking the windows, checking the closet, checking beneath the bed as if the stalker could somehow already be inside. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Tears blurred her vision. She didn't know what to do, where to go, who to trust. She sat in her living room chair, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at the photo lying on the floor. Every minute felt stretched, every sound amplified. Eventually, she dozed off only to wake with a jolt to a knock at her door. Her heart began pounding violently. She approached slowly, gripping the doorknob with trembling fingers. "Who is it?" she whispered. No answer, just silence. Heavy, absolute. Then, a second knock, softer, almost playful. Fiona stepped back, fear clawing up her spine. She didn't dare open it. After several agonizing moments, the knocking stopped. She waited, listening, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then an hour. When she finally gathered enough courage to look through the peephole, her blood turned to ice. Another note lay on the floor, slid halfway under the door. She reached down slowly, her hand shaking. The note was short, only 2 words. "I'm closer." Fiona pressed her back against the door, her breath shallow, her legs weakening beneath her. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't a game. It was a countdown, and she felt it. Something in her life was closing in, tightening, approaching. Whatever was stalking her had no intention of stopping, and deep in her bones, she sensed that the next step, the next boundary crossed would be far worse than anything that had come before. Morning crept into Fiona's flat without warmth, its pale light stretching across the floor like something unwelcome. She had barely slept after the knock at her door, drifting in and out of shallow, fractured dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined footsteps outside, imagined the silhouette in the street lamp returning, imagined the unseen camera clicking in the darkness. When her alarm finally rang, the sound jolted her like a slap. She didn't want to go to work. She didn't want to step outside the fragile shell of her flat. But staying home felt worse, like she'd be sitting still while something hunted her. The mill at least provided noise constant, deafening noise enough to muffle the dread for a few hours. She dressed slowly, her hands shaking as she wrapped her scarf around her neck. The memory of the photograph made her swallow hard. Someone had been close enough to see the strands of her hair falling loose. Someone had watched her, studied her, followed her, and they were still watching. Maybe even now. She peered through the curtains before leaving. The street was empty. Too empty. Even the usual early workers were nowhere to be seen. She stepped outside cautiously, locking the door with trembling fingers. The cold air hit her chest like a weight, and she hugged her coat tighter as she made her way down the street. Every sound felt sharper, every movement more suspicious. She couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, even though she saw no one. At the mill, the same repetitive hum of machines greeted her, but instead of comfort, it only heightened her anxiety. The noise seemed too loud, as if drowning out something important like footsteps behind her, or whispers she needed to hear. Mary approached her during break, leaning on the table with a concerned expression. "You look awful," she said gently. "Are you sure you're not sick?" Fiona forced a tired smile. "Just didn't sleep well." Mary frowned, studying her face. "It's more than that. You've been off for days." Fiona hesitated, feeling the familiar reluctance rise again. Telling someone meant exposing it, making it real, inviting judgment or disbelief. But something inside her cracked. Maybe exhaustion, maybe fear. "Someone's been leaving notes," she whispered, her fingers tightening around her teacup. Mary's eyebrows rose. "Notes? What kind of notes?" Fiona told her. Not everything, but enough. The messages on her door, the silhouette watching, the photo. Mary's face didn't show the disbelief Fiona expected. Instead, she looked frightened. "You need to go to the police," Mary said quietly. "This isn't some harmless nonsense. Someone's targeting you." Fiona shook her head quickly. "I can't. What if he's watching me there? What if he follows me inside? What if reporting it makes him angry?" Mary opened her mouth to argue, but the supervisor's whistle cut the break short. Before leaving, Mary squeezed Fiona's arm. "Promise me you'll tell someone else. A neighbor, a family member, anyone." Fiona nodded, but the promise felt hollow. She walked home with dread weighing down every step. The sky darkened earlier than usual, clouds thick over the city. The orange glow of the street lamps flickered weakly, as if the entire neighborhood had grown tired. Her footsteps echoed faintly against the pavement. Halfway to her flat, she heard it again. That soft, steady rhythm behind her. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. Her hands trembled violently as she quickened her pace. The footsteps matched her tempo, not closing the distance, not falling behind, just following. She reached her door and nearly dropped her keys. When she finally got inside, she slammed the door and locked it, breathing heavily, bracing herself against the wood. She waited for the footsteps to approach, for someone to knock, for a silhouette to appear through the frosted glass panel. But nothing came, only silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Fiona walked deeper into the flat, needing to ground herself. But when she passed the kitchen table, she froze. The window above the table was slightly open, just a sliver, but it hadn't been open when she left. Her breath caught in her throat. She approached slowly, dread building with every step. On the windowsill lay something that didn't belong there. A small piece of paper, folded twice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for it with shaking fingers. Inside was a single sentence written in the same controlled handwriting as before. You lock the door, but you forget the windows. The note slipped from her fingers and drifted onto the floor. She stumbled backward, unable to breathe. He had been inside at some point. Maybe recently. Maybe hours ago. Maybe yesterday. She didn't know. The thought made her stomach twist. She checked every room in a panic: the bathroom, the bedroom, the closet, opening each door slowly, terrified of who or what might be waiting on the other side. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. No disturbances. Just the knowledge that someone had been close enough to understand her habits, close enough to study her movements, close enough to slip inside unnoticed. The realization left her trembling uncontrollably. She collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. She didn't know how much longer she could survive like this. Her thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. The silence of the flat pressed against her like a weight. Every corner seemed dangerous now, every shadow suspicious. Time stretched, slipping away unnoticed. It was hours before she finally rose again. Night had fallen outside, thick and oppressive. She made her way to the window with cautious steps, peering out toward the street. The bench across from her building was empty. The street lamp flickered. But then movement. A lone figure stepped out from behind a parked car. Her heart lurched painfully. It wasn't the same silhouette as before. This one was closer, much closer. The figure walked slowly toward her building. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Purposeful. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back from the window, not wanting to be seen, but unable to tear her eyes away. The figure approached until it reached the front of her building. Then it stopped, looked up, directly at her window. Fiona stumbled backward, pressing her back against the wall. Her breathing became shallow, ragged. When she dared approach the window again, the figure was gone. The street was empty. She clenched her hands into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She felt trapped, cornered, watched. More than watched, studied. She moved carefully through her flat, turning on every light, locking the window, checking the door again and again. Sleep didn't come, couldn't come. Every minute felt like an hour. Every sound felt like a threat. As dawn crept through her curtains, Fiona felt something shift. The sense that the stalker wasn't satisfied with notes or silhouettes anymore. He was getting bolder, more confident, more present, and the distance between them, whatever thin line of safety she had left, was disappearing. One final thought anchored itself in her mind as the weak morning light spread across her floor. He wasn't just closer, he was getting ready. Fiona moved through the next day in a daze, as though reality itself had become warped. The world around her felt muted, distant, like she was looking at everything through a pane of glass. Every sound echoed too long, every face seemed unfamiliar. Every shadow stretched too far. She barely remembered walking to work, The mill's noise pounded against her skull, but even that wasn't enough to pull her fully into the present. She kept glancing toward the windows, imagining the figure outside her flat, staring up at her windowsill where she had once felt safe. That illusion was gone now. When Mary approached her at break, Fiona didn't even notice until a hand touched her shoulder. She flinched violently, nearly spilling her tea. "You're shaking?" Mary whispered, her voice thick with worry. Fiona tried to steady her breathing, tried to swallow the terror lodged in her throat. But the words she wanted to say tangled together, forming a tight knot inside her chest. "I didn't sleep," she murmured. Mary stared at her quietly, then leaned closer. "This isn't just some nuisance, Fiona. Someone is after you, and it's getting worse." Fiona knew she was right. She felt it in her bones. She had felt it for days. But fear had wrapped itself around her, whispering that speaking up would make everything unravel even faster. She didn't want to draw more attention, didn't want to provoke the man who had already crossed the line into her home. When her shift ended, she dreaded the walk home. The streets felt narrower, darker, more dangerous. She scanned every passing car, every empty doorway, every movement in the distance. But the walk remained eerily quiet, too quiet. When she reached her building, her pulse quickened. A cold dread swept through her. Her door was slightly ajar. Not wide open, just a few inches. But that was enough. Enough to break whatever fragile courage she had left. She froze, staring at the gap, her breath stilled in her chest. She had locked it. She remembered locking it. She replayed the moment. In her memory, turning the latch, pulling on the handle, hearing the click. The door shouldn't be open. She stepped back from it instinctively, the air around her seeming to tighten. Should she run for help? Should she scream? But the hallway felt empty, hollow. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. Fiona placed her hand on the door, barely touching it, pushing it just enough to widen the gap. Inside, the flat looked exactly the same. Nothing overturned, nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. Yet everything felt wrong. She stepped inside slowly, each footfall echoing too loudly. She checked the living room first, then the kitchen, then the bathroom, then the bedroom. Each room looked untouched, but the feeling lingered. Someone had been there. Recently, the air held the faint scent of cologne, a scent she didn't own. When she reached her bedroom, she found the only sign she needed. A single strand of her scarf lay on the pillow. She hadn't worn that scarf. In days it had been folded in a drawer. Her throat tightened. He had been in her bedroom. He had touched her belongings. He had been inches from where she slept. She backed away, her heart racing, tears burning her eyes. She knew this wasn't coincidence or chance. He was growing bolder, and he wanted her to know it. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, hugging her knees. For the first time, she wanted to scream for help, but the fear of opening her door again paralyzed her. As she sat there shaking, something else caught her eye. A shadow, just a faint one, shifting across her curtains. She crawled toward the window painfully, slowly, and peeked through a narrow gap. He was there again, standing across the street. Not hidden this time, not lurking in the fog. Standing in the open, facing her building directly. She couldn't see his face in detail, but his posture was unmistakable, calm, patient, unbothered. Like this was all a game he was in complete control of. And as if sensing her gaze, the figure tilted his head slightly upward, as though acknowledging her fear. Fiona stumbled away from the window, her breath catching in her chest. She wanted to call someone, anyone, but the phone on the counter felt miles away. She paced the flat, hands shaking uncontrollably, trying to convince herself he wasn't coming inside again. Hours passed. The figure eventually stepped away, disappearing into the night. But the damage was done. Fiona slept only when exhaustion forced her body to shut down. When she woke the next morning, she moved with the slow, stiff motions of someone who didn't trust her own limbs. She checked the windows, the door, the closets again and again before finally stepping outside. The cold morning air bit at her skin as she hurried to work. She walked quickly, refusing to look behind her, afraid of seeing someone too close. The idea of going to the mill felt pointless, but it was the only place where she wasn't fully alone. When she stepped inside, Mary rushed to her. "I came to your flat last night," she whispered urgently. Fiona blinked. "What?" "I knocked. You didn't answer." Fiona felt her stomach drop. She hadn't heard anything. She had been awake, listening to every sound. Mary grabbed her arms tightly. "You have to go to the police. This has gone too far. I'm coming with you." The force of Mary's insistence startled her, but Fiona felt the panic rising again. "No," she whispered. "No, police. Not yet." Mary stared at her as if she couldn't understand. "Why? What are you afraid of?" Fiona swallowed hard, unable to articulate the fear inside her. The idea of going to police, filing a report, making everything official, it felt like crossing a line that couldn't be undone. If the stalker had already been bold enough to enter her home, what would he do if he felt threatened? As she tried to explain, a noise echoed through the mila. Loud, shrill whistle. It wasn't the supervisor's usual signal. People looked confused, murmuring among themselves. A moment later, the foreman approached Mary and Fiona, his face pale. "There's something outside," he muttered. "A message." Fiona felt her stomach twist. "For who?" she whispered. He hesitated. "For you." The room tilted. She began to shake again, her knees weakening beneath her. Mary grabbed her arm and marched toward the mill entrance with her. Outside, near the main gate, a piece of cardboard hung on the chain-link fence. Letters painted in thick black strokes. Everyone else kept their distance. Some whispered, some stared, some backed away entirely. Fiona stepped forward slowly. Her breath fogged the air as she neared the sign. 4 words. Nothing more. "I know your routines." The paint dripped like fresh blood, the message bold and unmistakable. The world seemed to fall away. The city, the mill, the people, low dissolved. Only the words remained, burning themselves into her mind. This wasn't just watching anymore. It wasn't just following. It was studying, learning, preparing. Fiona's knees nearly buckled. Mary caught her just before she collapsed. When she finally found her voice again, it came out in a broken whisper. "He's not just closer," she said. "He knows everything." The dread that followed didn't merely creep in, it settled into her bones. And for the first time, she felt something colder than fear settle behind it. Certainty. Whatever the stalker was planning, whatever he wanted, whatever path he was carving, he was almost ready to take the next step. And Fiona feared she wouldn't be able to outrun it. The message on the fence burned into Fiona's thoughts long after she left the mill. Even as Mary held her arm and tried to guide her away from the gathering crowd, Fiona felt herself drifting, barely present. The world around her had become muffled again, voices reduced to distant murmurs, faces blurred, movements slow and unnatural. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing outside her own life, watching herself unravel. Mary practically dragged her down the street, refusing to let go. "We're going to the police," she insisted, her tone fierce, determined. Fiona resisted weakly, the fear inside her pulsing like a second heartbeat. "No," she whispered. "You don't understand. If I go, he'll know. He always knows." Mary stopped abruptly, turning to face her, gripping her shoulders tightly. "He already knows everything," she snapped. "Look at what he's doing to you. Look at what he's doing around you. He's not going to stop unless someone stops him." Fiona swallowed hard, her throat dry, her breath trembling. She wanted help, God. She needed help, but the fear had grown so enormous that even taking a step towards safety felt like provoking a wolf with her back turned. Before she could respond, a cold gust of wind swept down the street. Eyes flicked instinctively toward the nearest corner, scanning for movement, for a silhouette, for him. She felt watched. Not generally, not vaguely. Watched, intently, closely enough to feel a pinprick sensation at the back of her neck. She pulled away from Mary and crossed her arms tightly around her body. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let me think." Mary opened her mouth to argue again, but something in Fiona's eyes made her stop. She exhaled sharply, her frustration giving way to worry. "All right," she said quietly, "but I'm coming with you. Whatever you do, wherever you go, wherever you go. Not letting you face this alone." A fresh wave of emotion rose in Fiona's chest, gratitude mixed with terror, but she didn't argue. They walked the rest of the way to Fiona's building together, though Fiona felt no safer with another person beside her. The shadows still seemed to move. The windows still felt like eyes. The building loomed ahead, darker than usual. The stairwell, lights flickering weakly as she approached. Fiona hesitated at the entrance. Everything inside her screamed not to go in, but she needed to be in her own space, even if that space felt violated. The two women stepped inside, the echo of their footsteps ricocheting through the stairwell. Fiona's hand shook as she unlocked her flat door. She pushed it open slowly, bracing herself for another disturbing sin, another note. Another item moved, another scent that didn't belong. The flat was silent. Still, but the silence didn't feel reassuring. It felt staged. They stepped inside cautiously. Fiona scanned the room with darting eyes, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But nothing happened. "See?" Lee whispered, trying to sound hopeful. "It's empty." Fiona knew better. Empty didn't mean safe. Empty meant he had been here already, or would be again. She went to the window automatically, peeking through the small gap between the curtains. The street looked undisturbed, but she no longer trusted appearances. Mary explored the small flat, checking the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. When she returned, her expression was tense. "Fiona, you can't stay here alone?" Fiona rubbed her forehead, the weight of exhaustion settling again. She wanted to agree, but something in her resisted. Leaving felt dangerous too. If he had studied her so carefully, wouldn't he notice if she suddenly changed her routine? But before she could answer, Mary's gaze drifted toward the kitchen table. Something new was lying there. A small, square object. Fiona hadn't noticed it when she walked in. Neither had Mary. They approached cautiously. It was a cassette tape. Unlabeled, black, ordinary. But its presence felt sinister. Fiona stared at it, her stomach twisting. Mary picked it up slowly, examining both sides. "He left this," she whispered. Fiona nodded faintly. There was no question about it. The tape wasn't hers, and no one else had access to her flat. Her breath stuttered. "Don't play it," she said quickly. "We don't know what's on it." Mary frowned. "Don't. You want to know?" Fiona shook her head vigorously. Every instinct screamed that whatever was on that tape was something she was not meant to hear. Something meant to terrify. Something meant to break her. Mary hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. But finally, she placed the tape back onto the table carefully, as though afraid it might explode. The tension in the room thickened. Fiona paced, her hands clasped tightly. "He's watching," she whispered, more to herself Then Mary, he knows when I leave, when I come home, when I sleep, when I wake. Mary swallowed. We should go to my place. Just for tonight. You need rest. You need time to think. Without a sound, cut her off. A soft thump. From the hallway outside, Fiona's body seized. Up. Mary turned sharply, her expression darkening. Another thump. Quieter this time, like something brushing against the floor. Fiona moved toward the door slowly, dread weighing down every step. Mary grabbed her arm. Don't, she hissed. But Fiona couldn't stop. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then paper sliding, being pushed. Slowly, deliberately. Fiona stepped back, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Mary's expression hardened. He's here, she whispered. Fiona approached the door cautiously and crouched, staring at the narrow gap beneath it. A small sheet of paper had been pushed through. It lay there, face down, edges slightly bent. Fiona didn't want to pick it up. Her hands trembled violently. Mary knelt beside her, her fingers steadier, and reached for the paper. She flipped it over. Fiona felt her stomach drop. A photograph? A new one? Not taken from behind. This one was taken through the window of her flat. It showed Fiona sitting on her sofa last night, hugging her knees, her back against the wall. Behind her, the faint outline of a figure reflected in the window's glass. Inside the room, Mary gasped sharply, covering her mouth. Fiona's knees buckled. Her legs gave out beneath her. Someone had been behind her, inside, watching her, photographing her, while she sat there, shaking in the dark. She hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard breathing, hadn't felt movement. But the photograph didn't lie. Fiona's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Mary grabbed her arm, pulling her up. We're leaving, she said firmly. Right now. Fiona didn't resist this time. The terror was too immense, too consuming. She knew staying in the flat another minute was impossible. They grabbed Fiona's coat and scarf. Mary took her arm and guided her out into the hallway. But as they reached the stairwell, Fiona froze again. The cold sensation of being watched crawled across her skin. Slowly, she lifted her gaze upward. On the landing above them, partially hidden in the shadows, stood a figure. Tall, motionless, as though carved from the dark itself. Watching them. The light flickered once, just once, and when it steadied, the figure was gone. Fiona's scream never made it past her lips. Mary's grip tightened, and the two women fled down the stairs, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the silent, waiting darkness above. Fiona didn't remember running out of the building. She didn't remember the streetlights, or the cold wind, or Mary pulling her forward with both hands. All she remembered was the feeling, the crushing, suffocating certainty that the figure on the landing had been waiting, not passing by, not wandering, waiting, watching, for her. They didn't stop running until they reached Mary's car 3 blocks away. Mary fumbled with the keys, dropping them once, cursing under her breath. Her hands trembling despite her attempts to stay calm. When the doors finally unlocked, the two women collapsed inside and slammed the doors shut. Fiona stared straight ahead, unable to blink, unable to breathe normally. Her mind replayed the image over and over. A silhouette, a stillness that wasn't human. A presence so intent it felt like a physical grip. Mary started the engine, her breathing heavy. We're going to my place, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. You're not going back there. Not tonight. Not ever alone. Fiona nodded slowly, though her thoughts were scattered, disjointed. The world outside the window blurred as they drove. Each shadow on the pavement felt like it moved toward the car. Each passing face seemed to stay turned just a moment too long. Fiona pressed herself deeper into the seat, curling slightly, instinctively trying to make herself smaller. Mary kept glancing at her, worry etched deeply into her features. "He can't follow you everywhere," she said. It sounded like a reassurance, but her voice gave her away. She didn't believe it. And neither did Fiona. The drive felt endless, but eventually they reached Mary's flat on the south side of the city, a modest top-floor unit overlooking a narrow street. Mary ushered Fiona inside quickly, locking the door with both the main lock and the chain. She checked the windows, closed the curtains, switched on every light. Only when the flat was fully illuminated did she finally exhale. Fiona stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped tightly around her body. Mary softened as she looked at her. "Sit down," she said gently. "I'll make tea." Fiona didn't want tea. She didn't want to sit. She wanted silence. Darkness and noise, all at once. Anything to drown out the memory of the photograph, of the figure on the landing, of the cassette tape sitting on her table. But she sat anyway, because the alternative was standing still long enough for fear to take over completely. The kettle whistled. The sound was shrill, cutting through the room so sharply that Fiona flinched. Mary noticed. She hurried to pour the boiling water, her movements quick and careful. When she handed Fiona a cup, Fiona clasped it with both hands, more for warmth than comfort. "I'm calling the police tomorrow first thing," Mary said. Fiona hesitated, then lowered her eyes. "What will I tell them?" Mary looked incredulous. "You tell them someone is breaking into your home. Someone's stalking you. Someone is leaving threats. Someone took a picture from inside your flat. What more do you need?" Fiona's hands shook, the tea rippling in the cup. "Proof," she whispered. "They never listen without proof." "You have proof?" Mary insisted. The photograph alone as she stopped suddenly, her expression shifting. Slowly, she set down her cup. "Where's the photograph?" Fiona's breath caught. She hadn't taken it. Mary had been the one holding it. Mary stood abruptly and rushed toward her coat pocket, panic tightening her movements. She checked one pocket, then the other, then the inside lining. Nothing. She knelt to search the floor, the couch cushions, the area near the door. Fiona felt numbness spread through her chest. "It's gone," Mary whispered. "It was in my hand when we left." "I know it was. I didn't." "Drop it." "I didn't." Fiona closed her eyes. She could feel the world tilting, shifting under her feet again. He had taken it back, somehow, somewhere between her flat and Mary's. He had been close enough to retrieve it without either of them noticing. Mary sank onto the couch, her breathing ragged. "This isn't random," she said quietly. "He's playing with you?" Fiona nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "He's been playing for a long time." The room fell silent again. The quiet pressed in from all sides, thick and heavy. Then a faint tapping sound came from the wall, near the window. Mary froze. Fiona felt her blood run cold. Tap, tap, tap. Mary stood slowly and approached the window, stopping a few feet away. Fiona wanted to beg her not to look, but her voice wouldn't come. Mary lifted the curtain edge just enough to peek outside. Her breath hitched. "What?" Fiona whispered, barely able to form the word. Mary didn't answer at first. Then she lowered the curtain very slowly, her face pale as chalk. "Someone is standing across the street," she whispered. "Just standing there." Fiona's stomach twisted violently. "Facing us?" "Yes." Fiona's breath grew fast and shallow. "Is it him?" Mary swallowed hard. "I don't know. I can't see his face. He's just still." Fiona felt a tremor rise through her legs. "Don't look again," she whispered. "Please." Mary stepped back, her eyes fixed on the floor. "He followed us," she said quietly. "How did he follow us?" Fiona didn't answer. Her mind raced, searching for explanations that didn't exist. Mary hurried to turn off the living room light, plunging them into semi-darkness. "We shouldn't be visible," she said. She moved to shut the remaining curtains tightly. Fiona's breath shook uncontrollably. "He knows. We're here," she whispered. "Curtains won't matter." Mary stopped and turned to her voice firm. "He doesn't decide what matters. We do." But fear spoke louder in Fiona's mind. She felt it crawling through her thoughts, twisting her memories until she couldn't separate intuition from paranoia. "I need to listen to the tape," she said suddenly. Mary spun around. "Absolutely not. If it's from him, then it's information," Fiona said. "It might tell me what he wants, or it might be exactly what he wants, scaring you into losing control." Fiona shook her head, more certain now than she had been about anything else. "I need to know. I won't survive not knowing." Mary hesitated, torn between protecting her and helping her. Fiona lowered her voice. "Please." After a long moment, Mary finally nodded. "I'll go get it from your flat," she said. Fiona immediately grabbed her arm. "No, you can't go alone. And I can't leave you alone here," Mary argued. The tapping sound came again, 3 soft knocks against the glass, deliberate and patient. They both froze. Fiona's heart lurched painfully. Mary grabbed her shoulders. "We're not going anywhere tonight," she whispered. "We'll wait till morning." Fiona nodded faintly, though she doubted morning would change anything. They sat together on the floor, backs against the couch, listening to the silence. The tapping did not come again. But Fiona felt him outside, felt his eyes, felt his breath in the cold air seeping beneath the windows. She didn't sleep. Neither did Mary. Hours passed, and when dawn finally crept through the thin gap in the curtains, Fiona realized something chilling. The street outside was completely empty. Whoever had been watching them had stood there the entire night, and left only minutes before the sun rose. Not running, not hiding, just walking away. As if he knew exactly when they would be too exhausted to keep watch. Fiona pressed a shaking hand against her chest. She could deny many things, but not this. He wasn't just following. He was learning, studying, predicting, and the longer it went on, the more she felt like he wasn't getting closer to her life. He was getting closer to her thoughts. Morning light did nothing to warm the atmosphere inside Mary's flat. If anything, the soft gray glow filtering through the curtains made everything feel more fragile, exposing the sleepless night etched in both women's faces. Fiona sat hunched at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She barely noticed. Her body felt disconnected, like she was borrowing space inside herself rather than living in it. Mary moved around the flat with a restless energy, checking the locks again, the windows again, peering through the smallest slits in the curtains. She kept rubbing her arms as though trying to erase something from her skin. "We're going to the police," Mary finally said. The firmness in her tone had cracks in it now, cracks that hadn't been there the night before. Fiona didn't respond. She stared blankly into her cup, the liquid inside trembling from the faint tremor running through her hands. "Fiona," Mary said sharply. "We're going." Fiona lifted her gaze slowly. Her eyes looked dim, unfocused. "He followed us here," she murmured. "If we leave, he'll follow again. If I stay, he'll come inside. There isn't a safe option." Mary knelt beside her, laying a steadying hand on Fiona's arm. "There is. You tell the police everything. And this time you're not alone." Fiona wanted to believe that, but the image of the missing photograph haunted her mind. Proof that had vanished as if it never existed, as if he controlled the parts of reality she needed the most. Mary stood abruptly. "Get your coat." Fiona flinched, but didn't argue. She slipped her arms into the sleeves, her movements slow and heavy. Mary opened the door cautiously, scanning the quiet landing before ushering Fiona out. The walk down the stairs was quiet. Too quiet. Even the usual distant traffic noise seemed muted. Fiona felt the hairs on her arms lift. Her steps slowed. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Mary gave her a tense look. "You're afraid. That doesn't mean something's wrong right now." But Fiona shook her head. "No, he's close." They reached the ground floor and stepped into the colder air outside. Nothing looked unusual. A few early morning commuters passed by. A cyclist moved down the street. A bus rumbled in the far distance. Normal, ordinary. But Fiona felt the heaviness of a gaze resting on her, sliding along her spine. Watching, waiting. They hurried too. The car. Before Mary unlocked it, she scanned the street again. "Do you see anyone?" she asked. Fiona peered carefully through the shifting crowd. No familiar silhouette, no still figure, no dark coat unmoving against the morning light. "He's here," she whispered. "But he's hiding himself today." Mary swallowed. "Get in, quickly." The drive to the police station felt longer than it should have. Every turn, every red light, every slow-moving pedestrian made Fiona's heart hammer. She kept glancing behind them, half expecting to see a car following at a careful distance, but the road behind them remained unremarkable. When they arrived, Mary parked right in front of the station and practically pulled Fiona out of the passenger seat. Fiona hesitated at the entrance, her legs suddenly weak. She looked up at the solid stone facade of the station, its large glass doors reflecting the busy street behind her. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows we're here." "Good," Mary snapped. "Let him know you're not afraid anymore." But Fiona was afraid more than ever. Still, she stepped inside. The waiting area was brighter than she expected. Fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. A uniformed officer at the front desk looked up, offering a polite but tired smile. "Morning. What can I do for you?" Mary began speaking. Fiona didn't hear the words. Her ears rang. Her mind drifted. The walls felt too close, the lights too sharp. When she finally tuned back in, the officer was watching Fiona carefully. "We'll need to make a formal report," he said gently. "Can you sit with me and tell me what's been happening?" Fiona swallowed hard. She nodded. They were taken to a small interview room, plain and cold, a metal table and 2 chairs. Fiona sat. Mary sat beside her. The officer settled across from them with a notepad. "Start wherever you can," he said softly. Fiona tried. She really tried. But as soon as she opened her mouth, her voice shook violently. "He's been watching me," she whispered. "Coming into my home. Leaving things. Taking things." Mary squeezed her hand. "Tell him about the notes," she urged. "Tell him about the photograph." The officer leaned forward. "Photograph?" Fiona nodded, trembling. "It was pushed under my door last night. A picture of me inside my flat. Do you have it with you?" Fiona felt nausea spike. "It's gone," she whispered. "It disappeared." The officer frowned slightly. "Disappeared? As in misplaced?" Mary made a frustrated sound. "No. Someone took it." The officer exhaled slowly, maintaining a composed expression. "All right, let's go, step by step." Fiona stared at the table. "He was inside my flat," she said softly. "Behind me, watching me. That's what the picture showed." The officer's pen stilled. "You're sure about that?" I saw the reflection, she whispered, in the window. He made a few notes, his brow tightening subtly. Not disbeliefs, something else. Concern, Fiona continued, her voice barely audible. He followed us to my friend's home last night. He stood outside until morning. The officer leaned back slightly, processing. Did you see him clearly? No, Fiona whispered, but I felt him. The officer's expression softened. Fear can sharpen instincts, he said carefully, but it can also cut him off, anger creeping into her tone. She's not imagining this. Fiona stared at the wall. Her heartbeat began to thud heavily, too fast, too strong. The ring in her ears grew louder. The air in the room felt thin. Something inside her warned her sharp, primal. Something's wrong, not outside, not in the hallway. In the room, Fiona lifted her gaze slowly, meeting the officer's eyes. He wasn't writing anymore. He wasn't asking another question. He was staring at her. Not unkindly, not suspiciously. Studying her. Fiona, he said softly, have you ever experienced severe stress or sleep deprivation? Mary stiffened. What are you implying? The officer kept his voice calm, measured, that the human mind can create patterns when it feels threatened. Shadows can feel like people. Silence can feel like presence. Sometimes trauma. Fiona stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You think I'm imagining him? The officer lifted his hands gently. I'm not dismissing anything. I'm trying to understand. But without physical evidence, it becomes difficult to. Fiona backed toward the door, shaking violently. He was there, she whispered. He was in my home. The officer rose slowly. Fiona, sit down. We're on your side. But Fiona was already reaching for the door. Mary rushed after her. Fiona, wait, they don't believe me, Fiona said, her voice breaking. No one ever believes this. Mary grabbed her arms. I believe you. That's enough. But Fiona wasn't convinced. She felt exposed, small, dismissed, unsafe. She bolted into the hallway, barely hearing Mary behind her. She pushed through the station doors and stumbled outside, gulping cold air like someone resurfacing from deep underwater. People passed by, oblivious. Cars moved steadily. The world continued, but Fiona stood frozen on the pavement, watching, waiting, because she felt him again, calm, close, certain, and she knew without seeing, without hearing that he was somewhere nearby. Somewhere just out of reach. Somewhere smiling quietly at the chaos he was creating. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling from head to toe. If the police couldn't help her, if evidence could vanish, if he could follow her without being seen, then there was only one possibility left. He didn't want her to run. He wanted her to come home. And Fiona realized, with a chill that settled deep into her bones, that soon she might have no choice. Fiona didn't remember walking away from the police station. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her through the crowd, through the noise, through the rush of morning life that felt increasingly distant from her own spiraling world. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely registered it. Every instinct screamed the same thing: go home. She wanted to resist it, wanted to run in the opposite direction, but the thought wouldn't leave. It pressed into her mind with an urgency she couldn't understand. Home, as if the only way out of the nightmare was to walk straight into it. Mary caught up to her halfway down the block. Fiona, stop! Fiona did, but she didn't look at her. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, on the road that led deeper into the city, toward the neighborhoods that felt less and less like places she belonged in. I need to go back, Fiona whispered. Mary grabbed her arm and turned her to face her. No, you don't, she said firmly. You absolutely don't. You aren't going anywhere near that place. Fiona finally looked at her. Her expression was hollow, distant, empty. He wants me there. And you're not going, Mary snapped. You're not walking into whatever he has planned. Fiona shook her head slowly, a strange calm settling over her. I don't think I have a choice. Mary opened her mouth to argue again, but something in Fiona's expression made her stop. Fiona wasn't panicking anymore. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She had slipped into a state beyond fear into the cold, detached clarity of someone who had accepted the inevitable. Mary tightened her grip. If you're going, she said, voice trembling with anger and fear, then I'm going with you. Fiona didn't argue. She turned and began walking. Mary followed. The city shifted around them as they made their way back toward Fiona's building. The closer they came, the quieter Fiona became, until she barely seemed awake. Her movements slowed as though she were being pulled by invisible strings. Mary stayed glued to her side, scanning every alley, every passing face, every parked car. When they reached the building, Fiona froze at the entrance. The stairwell light, the one that flickered the night before, was glowing steadily now. Too steadily. Fiona stepped inside slowly, each footstep echoing through the narrow, concrete space. Mary followed, tension coiling through her like a spring. Stay close, Fiona whispered. But Mary already was. They climbed the stairs in cautious silence. When they reached Fiona's floor, they both stopped. Fiona's door was slightly open, not broken, not forced, just open. As if someone had stepped inside moments earlier, or was still inside right now. Mary grabbed Fiona's wrist. We need to leave. Right now. Fiona didn't move. She pushed the door open and stepped in. Mary had no choice but to follow. The flat looked exactly as it had the night before, except for one thing. Something new lay on the kitchen table. The cassette tape. But not alone. Beside it was a small, worn leather wallet. Fiona's breath caught. She knew that wallet. She hadn't seen it in years. Her father's, lost the night he died. Fiona approached slowly, reaching out with trembling fingers. She picked up the wallet, her breath shaking. Inside was a photograph, old, creased, faded. Her father holding her as a child, her mother standing beside them, smiling. A picture she'd forgotten existed. A picture she never knew had gone missing. Mary looked horrified. Fiona, what is that doing here? Fiona closed the wallet, holding it to her chest. He's been in my life longer than I knew. She said it softly, numbly, as if reading a fact from a page. Mary shook her head. No, that can't be. But Fiona wasn't listening. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway. The bedroom door was ajar. A faint shadow moved inside. Mary stiffened. Fiona, do not go in there. Fiona stepped forward. Mary grabbed her arm, desperate, terrified. But Fiona slipped from her grasp like water. She moved toward the bedroom door, pushed it open, and let her eyes adjust to the dimness inside. At first, she saw nothing. Then she saw him, standing in the corner, tall, still, waiting. The same silhouette she had seen in the stairwell. The same figure reflected behind her in the photograph. But now she could see his face. Or rather, the absence of anything resembling one. His features were blurred, indistinct, as though someone had smudged the outline of a person. A shape without identity. A presence without detail. Fiona's body went rigid. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She felt rooted in place, every muscle locked by a terror so vast it became numbing. Mare rushed into the room behind her and stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. Who are you?" she demanded shakily. The figure didn't respond. It didn't shift. It didn't breathe. It simply stared, or seemed to stare at Fiona. Slowly, impossibly, it lifted one hand. A gesture so small, yet so deliberate it made Fiona's heart stutter. It pointed at her. Fiona's breath broke. Then, in a voice that was barely a voice, at all more like a faint vibration drifting through the room, the figure spoke. "You left." Fiona's knees buckled. Mary grabbed her before she collapsed. "What did you say?" Mary shouted. The figure didn't answer. It simply lowered its arm. Fiona forced out a whisper. "I don't know you." The air shifted. The figure took a single step forward. Mary pulled Fiona backward instinctively. "Stay where you are," Mary screamed. The figure didn't listen. It took another step. Mary dragged Fiona back, toward the hallway. "Run!" Fiona finally broke from her paralysis. The two women bolted out of the room, down the hallway, toward the front door, but as Fiona reached for the handle, she froze. The door wasn't open anymore. It was closed, locked. From the inside, Fiona grabbed the lock, twisting it desperately. It wouldn't budge. Behind them came a soft sound. Footsteps. Slow, measured. Mary grabbed Fiona's shoulders. The window. They sprinted into the living room. Mary yanked the curtains aside and shoved the window up. Cold air rushed in. There were 3 floors above the ground. Too high to jump safely. Too low to avoid trying. Mary climbed onto the sill first and turned back to Fiona. "Come on now." Fiona hesitated. A single thought echoed in her mind. "He doesn't want me to leave." Again, the footsteps grew closer. Mary grabbed Fiona's hand. "Move." And Fiona did. She climbed onto the sill. She felt the cold air hit her face, her hair whipping across her eyes. She gripped Mary's hand tightly. But before she could climb through, a hand landed on her shoulder. Cold, heavy, paralyzing. Fiona gasped. The world spun. The room faded. The only thing she heard was the faint voice again, right beside her ear now. "Come home." The flat dissolved into darkness. The cold vanished. The air thinned. For a moment, there was nothing. And then Fiona's body hit the pavement below. Mary's scream tore through the morning air. People ran. Someone called emergency services. Someone else shouted for help. But Fiona lay still, eyes open, staring at the sky as if seeing something no one else could. The figure never appeared in the window above. It never showed up on the street. It never surfaced again. The case would haunt Glasgow for decades. And the final, chilling detail carved into every investigator's memory was this. Fiona MacDonald died with a faint, fragile smile on her lips, as though in her final moments. She finally saw the face of the one who had followed her all her life,